Video number 5. I have the camera set on my paper closer to the bucks so that you can see the pencil marks better. I'm going to go ahead and add my 2H pencil on top of the 4H pencil. First, we're going to look at the different values in the buck again. Remember, the step we did last video was just starting with our 4H pencil. We did an outline and we added the 4H pencil wherever we saw value. When we see that it's a little darker, such as these spots underneath the chest, on top of the ear, on the horns, we went ahead and filled in value and pressed a little bit harder, but we were careful not to press hard on the pencil so that it damages the paper. Now, instead of using a Tertullian or something to smear our graphite with, we're using the tapered stroke. With the tapered stroke, there's not hard edges, very soft edges, back and forth. And we're going from the edge out inward so that we create gradation with the graphite pencil, and we're covering now over the 4H pencil. We're adding the 2H pencil, which I don't know why the 4H was right here, because the 2H is right behind me. I'm going to add the 2H pencil on top of the 4H. We're going to leave the lightest places light. We're just going to go over places that are obviously darker than the lightest pencil. You see a difference here in where the antlers curves. So with my 2H pencil, I'm going to add graphite into that curve. I'm going to avoid making lines. I'm going to go outward, downward, till I see, do you see the triangle here? I try to look at different values as shapes, and then in my mind, I'm stroking my pencil with a tapered stroke so that I'm forming that shape, but not with lines. I'm just going back and forth to establish that value. Okay, so I have this in here. It goes over a little bit. I see it just gradually curves with the antler. But I see some darkness here that I don't see above it, so I'm going to extend my 2H pencil in that area. And where I see it the darkest, I'm going to press a little harder, but not so hard that it damages the paper. You can work on one area at a time. If you just work on the antlers for a while, give it a break. Go back and work on the head or the ears, something of that sort. Okay, I've done this. I see more value in these horns that are shadowed. So where I see it the darkest, like in the middle of this one, and in the middle of these, coming that way, and in the bottom, I'm going to use my 2H pencil, and remember, don't hold it down here or up here. Try to hold it in the middle, in the crook of your hand, where you can be flexible with your wrist. And also, if you need another piece of computer paper to protect your hand, now with me drawing upright, I don't have that problem, but if you're laying your drawing down on a table and you're setting your hand on top of it, you're going to need an extra piece of computer paper to protect your drawing as you go. Now I'm going to emphasize these parts in the middle. Down here, there, comes more of a shadow here. So I'm going from the edge, which is a very light line. Now I'm going to make those gradated patches upward to, when I do the gradation of the graphite, that causes the antlers to take on a round feeling or a round appearance, because it creates shadow underneath. Now I see this antler's coming down here. I didn't make that real clear in my outline, and so I'm going to do that now. Goes back over and down. And there's darkness there on the shadow side of that antler. Right here. It's going to go up, behind. There you go. Now remember that this is only the second pencil and you have 5. So rather than press too hard, remember that you're going to come back with some darker pencils and you're going to go into the darker spots. But everywhere I see a line instead of value, I want to bring that line to the point where I don't see a line, but I just see shadow or value, and that takes away from the idea that it's a flat surface, but it's more of a round surface. Now here we have a very light horn, but we have value behind the horns. So you've got some options. You have your artistic license to practice here. I don't really want to fill in all the background color, so rather than fill in the background color behind these horns, I'm going to assume there's some light shadow on the edge, so that instead of seeing light or a line, I'm going to fill the edge in with some graphite very lightly to give the appearance of roundness. Of course, this one is darker on one edge than it is the other, but you still have to do something with that line. Now you can lighten it up too. You could take your eraser, which I talked to you about, a kneaded eraser, which mine is very old and probably needs replaced. You can dab that darkness of that line, make it very light, and in your imagination you could see that line in your mind. It might not even be there, but with the form that you have, you might be able to imagine it in your mind. So there's some alternatives that you can use here and still make it look good. Okay, I'm going to continue with my 2H pencil, and I'm going to go down here to these ears because I see some darkness around the ears. Any place I see darkness or lines, I want to improve that. I see a glare or a reflection here on top of the ear. So I'm going to go down a little bit and bring down some shadow right underneath that. And again, you could dab this with the eraser and make it disappear. And then I see some lines here just the contour, the shape of the hide or the fur of the deer. Then of course the shadow here, it's more of the shape of an oval, but I'm going to go back and forth this way because of the hair, the fur. And I'm going to bring it down to here. Okay, now on this ear, there's some shadow here that goes toward this line. We don't want to see the line, but we do want to see value. So we're going to fill that in here, go that way because of the hide, the skin. Okay, and then inside we see value. We see some of it dispersed. Okay. I see a very dark ridge around his ear. I can do that. Here I am holding the pencil incorrectly. I apologize. I've gotten the habit of holding my pencil different ways in order for you to see better. It's not necessarily the best way, but I'll try to be more careful of that. There's some value here that we filled in with the 4H, but now we're going to have to bring that down with the 2H and make it work with these pieces here. Before we go too far, let's go back to that other ear. Look at this ear. It's pretty dark on the one side. I think we got that. It's pretty light here, except there is some shadow even in the light part of it. So we don't want to miss that here. These antlers really are jagged there, and I didn't notice that before. Now, rather than see that as a line, let's make it jagged. But instead of one line making it jagged, let's bring out the value from the jagged line so that it doesn't look just like a line. It looks like horns. Okay, and we're obviously going to have to go over this again with a darker pencil, but it helps to differentiate it. Now let's go, I think, the rim around that ear, and just make sure we're done with the ears before we go on. Now we're going to go down to that nose where it's a little darker around the eyes. Around the horns. Where the antlers sit, it's very dark here. Kind of spreads out too. If you look close, that could be considered cross-hatching, but from a distance, what you see is value. Now let's go down here, around the eyes, almost like eye patches. We're going to darken that in. We're going to bring that over the nose. There's a little light spot there on the nose. I'm going to go underneath. There's a curvy part there. We don't want to miss the curve. Remember, those curved lines are very important, as well as the straight lines and angled lines. There's one here. Lots of lines going this way. And then a few making that angle underneath his chin. Okay, we're going to fill that in very lightly, except for the shadow part. We want to make get darker. And then underneath here, you're going to see more, and it's going to gradually go outward. But I have some pretty dark lines here that I don't want to see as lines. Ooh. I want to go around that line dark enough that it makes that dark line disappear and turn that contrast, make it look like fur. I might even have to dab it with the eraser because it's pretty dark. So I'm going to dab it with my eraser, lighten it up, then go over it again. So instead of seeing a line, I see fur. Okay. Now that's much better. I'm happier with that. Any place, anytime you see a darker spot, you want to fill that in. Now I'm going to go to this part of the deer, which is going to require some time. As soon as you get the idea of the second layer here, I want you to stop the video and go ahead and do it with your own animal so that you see the different values and you can bring out more contrast. With 5 different pencils, you can see so much more. Bring out so much more in the animal. Make it look so much more real. The darker parts, you want to go over darker. And the parts that aren't filled in, this is the time to fill them in very lightly. Now, I noticed I didn't do this part, and I could leave that empty, but on the first, on the last video, I didn't fill this in with the 4H pencil like I wanted to. And so I'm going to take my 4H, I just picked up my 4H pencil. And I'm going to go over that lightly because that was my first pencil. I missed this. Rather than go over it with the 2H because I want it light, I'm going to use my 4H pencil and then go backwards. And since you can't really see much past that, I think that's as far as down as I'm going to go. But see, all the value should be filled in somewhat by now. You should have value just about everywhere. Even the light spots you should create value with. Let's see, the light spots around his eyes. We could dab that right underneath his eye from the fur. The fur is pretty light. We don't want that too strong. So I'm going to dab that line and use my 4H. Very lightly. Even though it's a lighter color here, I can use my 4H, go over it. Instead of seeing a line now, you should see that fur. Okay. Now, we look again. Do we see any place that doesn't have value? There might be a few places that we leave empty, like the lightness of the horns. This place here is pretty bright, so we're going to leave that most of that empty. Maybe a little bit here. we could fill in that connects to the nose. Remember that nose, how dark it is? We should go over that again because each pencil we're going to add more graphite over the other graphite in order to make that nose the dark, what it should look like. And I'm not pressing real hard. Taking my time, and I want you to take your time too. It's very important to take your time. Don't rush this. Every work of art needs time, effort, and your best. Okay, so that's the end of the 4H and the 2H pencil. And in our next video, we will probably add the last 3 pencils in order to finish our animal and have a finished product.